Hello and welcome. My name is George and my channel is all about helping you get the most out of Logic Pro so that you can record and produce your best music in your home studio. Today we're going to be going over everything you need to know to record your vocals into Logic Pro. We're going to dive into all the different settings we need to look at in Logic Pro, as well as setting up our microphone and our audio interface. So let's dive in. Okay, so we'll start by opening up an empty project in Logic Pro. So here under New Project, I have Empty Project selected. And now if we go down here to Details, the main setting we want to look at is our input and output device. So this is going to be set to our audio interface. So wherever you're plugging your microphone into, this is going to be your input device. In my case, it's this Profire 2626. And your output device is going to be wherever you're listening from. So that would generally be using headphones and generally plugged into your audio interface as well. So this would generally be the same device. Next, for our sample rate, you can either set this to 44.1 or 48. Generally speaking, 44.1 is the standard for CDs and uploading music to streaming sites, and 48 is generally used when working with video. Now you can always start with 48, and then when you bounce out your track later, you can bounce it down to 44.1. So I'm going to set my project to 48. I'm going to go ahead and click choose. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create an audio track to record our vocals to. You can see here the different types of track we can add. We want to make sure we're selecting an audio track. And the next thing we want to look at is our audio input. So currently we're set to audio input 1. You'll see that I currently have 16 different inputs that I can select. I'm going to stay with audio input 1. Now what this means is on my audio interface, I'm going to have to plug in my microphone into input 1 of my audio interface. I'll show you that real soon. Now our output, this can stay at output 1 plus 2. Most audio interfaces have your headphones and speaker monitors set up on output 1 and 2. So we're going to stick with that. We can double check to make sure that our input device is set to our audio interface, which it is. And we can double check that our audio output device is set to our audio interface as well. I'll just mention quickly that you'll notice I have a different audio input and output device, but usually this will be set to the same thing, which would be your audio interface. So now I'll go ahead and hit create, and I'm just going to quickly rename this track by just double clicking here where it says audio 1, and I can rename this to vocals. And if I want to take that a step further, I can go over here to the icon and change my icon to something that's appropriate for recording vocals. Okay, so now let's look at setting up our microphone for recording. Some microphones, such as this one, have some switches and settings that you can change. So let's make sure we have these set correctly for recording our vocals. The first set of switches at the top is to select our polar pattern. So this sets how the microphone is going to pick up sound. So at the very top, we have what's called a figure 8 pattern. And when we're in figure 8 pattern, this means that the microphone is going to be picking up sound from the front of the microphone and from the back of the microphone as well, but it's going to reject sound from the sides. Next, in the middle, we have the cardioid pickup pattern. When we're set in cardioid mode, the microphone is only going to be picking up sound from the front. It's going to reject the back and the sides. And then our last pattern on the bottom is omni mode. And when we're in omni mode, the microphone is going to pick up sound all around the microphone. So front, back, and sides. So for vocals, I suggest you set your microphone in cardioid mode. So this is going to mean the microphone is going to pick up your voice from the front of the microphone, but it's going to cut out any room sound or any unwanted noise coming from the back and sides of the microphone. The next set of switches we have is a high pass filter. So this is used to filter out low frequencies directly from the microphone. So we have here 80, 0, and 40. So at 80, we're filtering out 80 hertz and below. At 0, it remains unchanged. We're not filtering out anything. And at 40, we're going to be filtering out 40 hertz and below. If you have a high pass filter, I suggest you engage this. In my case, I'm going to set it to 80 hertz. So 80 hertz is quite low. So it's just going to be filtering out any low end rumble in the room that might be there from some vents, air conditioning, things like that. So it's not going to affect the character of your voice. And the last set of switches we have is a pad. So we have -10, 0, and -5. So at -10, this is going to reduce the microphone signal by 10 decibels before it goes to your preamps on your interface. At 0, it's going to remain unchanged. And at -5, it's going to reduce the signal by -5 dB. Now for vocals, you can leave this at 0 and leave it unchanged. A pad is generally used if you're recording really loud instruments, such as drums or maybe an electric guitar amp. And you would use it if you have your preamps turned all the way down, but you're still distorting. Then you could bring down the signal even further directly from the microphone. But since the voice isn't an overly loud instrument, we can simply leave the pad off or set it to 0. Now, if you don't have any switchable switches like this on your microphone, that's not something to be worried about, but it is generally good to know what the pickup pattern is of your microphone. That way you'll know how your microphone is picking up the sound in your room. You can find this information easily just by going to the product website of your microphone. Another thing you'll want to know about your microphone is whether or not you have a condenser or a dynamic microphone. This microphone, for example, is a condenser microphone, and this one is a dynamic. The main reason you'll want to know the difference is because condenser microphones require phantom power to operate, whereas dynamic microphones do not. So for a condenser microphone, we'll need to turn on phantom power on our audio interface, which there will be a little button that says 48V, or it might even say phantom power on it. So that'll need to be engaged, and that'll send power from our mic cable to our microphone so that it can function properly. So now that we've adjusted all the settings on our microphone, you should then place your microphone on a stand, and that way there won't be any noise picked up by the microphone from you handling the microphone. A good starting place is to set your microphone about 6 to 8 inches away from you while you're singing. If you want to go for a real intimate sound, then you can move a bit closer to the microphone, and that's going to increase the bass in your voice. But be aware that the closer you get to the microphone, the more prone it'll be to pick up plosives. So plosives are big breaths of air that happen when you are singing words with P's and T's, for example. Now, to help cut down on this, we use what's called a pop filter. And a pop filter looks like this. So this will help slow down any large bursts of air when you're singing. So this will hook up to your microphone stand, and then you would place this in front of the microphone. So I'd place the pop filter around 6 to 8 inches away from the microphone, and then the singer can stay an inch or two off of the pop filter, but generally they tend to sing right up against it. So the pop filter also helps keep the singer right off the microphone too. So next we'll plug one end of our XLR mic cable into our microphone, and the other end we're going to plug into our audio interface. And if you'll remember earlier, on our audio track in Logic, we set the input to input 1. So I'm going to make sure to plug in my microphone into input 1 of my audio interface. So now that we have our microphone all set up, let's return back to Logic. Now, before we do anything else, I'm going to suggest that you turn off your speakers or monitors and that you use headphones to listen back to your vocals. This is going to make sure that when we're recording, we don't get any unwanted sound from our speakers into our microphone. And it's also going to eliminate the chance of creating feedback. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the little R here, which is going to record arm our track. And now you can see that we have signal coming in from my microphone. Now we haven't gone over adjusting our preamp gain yet, so you may see very little signal on your microphone at the moment. You also may or may not be hearing your voice in your headphones right now. So if you aren't currently hearing anything in your headphones, what you're going to want to do is go up to Logic Pro here, go to Preferences, and then Audio. And then from here, we're going to go to General. And then we have a few monitoring options here. So monitoring refers to how we're hearing ourselves. And if your settings don't look the same as mine, you'll want to go over to Advanced here and make sure that the Show Advanced Tools is checked, as well as everything else below. So you can just hit enable all, and then you'll get all the options that are available to you in Logic. So first off, if you have software monitoring unchecked, that means you're not going to be hearing any of your record enabled tracks in Logic. However, if you have an interface that supports direct monitoring, that means you can listen to your vocals directly from your audio interface. Now, one of the advantages of this is that it cuts down on the amount of latency, which is a little bit of delay that you get from the time that you speak into your microphone, from the time it goes into Logic, and then back out into your headphones. So that delay or latency occurs when you're using software monitoring, which means you're listening back to the track through Logic. Direct monitoring, on the other hand, you're listening directly from your audio interface before the sound even gets into Logic. So that means it's a lot quicker to getting to your ears and there's much less delay happening. The one downside of direct monitoring is you're not going to be able to hear any effects that you place on your voice in Logic. You'll just hear the dry signal directly from your audio interface. I will say that some interfaces, such as the UA Apollo, have effects built in right into the interface. So you could add reverb and things like that directly from the audio interface. Generally speaking, most people are going to use software monitoring. So that way, anything we do in Logic, we can hear back in our headphones. Now, with software monitoring enabled like this and our vocal track record enabled, we should be hearing our vocals in our headphones right now. Now, if we enable this input monitoring, now we actually will no longer be able to hear ourselves at the moment. So when input monitoring is enabled, then you'll have to check this little I button as well, which turns on input monitoring, and then you'll be able to hear yourself. So it just adds a second step. So this can be helpful if you want to see the levels, but you don't want to hear them. Maybe your speakers are still on. And then once you get your headphones on, then you can turn on input monitoring and then hear that back. I generally like to be able to hear myself just by clicking the record enable button. So I'm just going to leave the software monitoring checked. We can now close this. So now that we have our track and our monitoring set up, it's time to adjust the gain on our preamp. So a preamp is used to boost the signal of a microphone. Without it, we would just get a really low signal that would be almost inaudible and it wouldn't be any good for recording. So you should see a knob on the front of your audio interface that says gain, and you're going to slowly want to turn that up as you're singing, and you're going to see more and more signal on your audio track. You should aim for your audio in the loudest part of your songs to be around -10, so somewhere around here, and averaging around -18. That way, if we happen to sing louder, that gives us some headroom so that we're not clipping. We have a little bit of ways to go before we hit 0 dB and start having some audible distortion from my microphone. So the amount of gain you have to add from your preamp or how far you turn the knob is going to depend on your microphone, how loud you're singing, and the amount of gain that you can get out of your preamps. A dynamic microphone, for example, will take more gain than a condenser microphone. For most audio interfaces, I would say the 12 o'clock position is a good bet to start. And then from there, you can adjust it to try and get around the -10 range on the meters. Now, on the subject of meters, I'll just mention in Logic, there's actually two different ways of viewing and displaying the meters. If we go back to our preferences, to display, and then mixer. Under scale, you'll see here I have it set to exponential. And you can see on my meters, it gets more detailed the further we go up the meter. And my vocals right now are sitting about a third of the way up on the meters. Now, if I change the scale to linear, now you'll see the meters are linear all the way to the top, and my vocals are almost 3/4 of the way up the meters. So depending on which scale you use, the levels on your meters are going to look a little bit different. For myself, I like the exponential, so I'm going to leave it set there. So now we have our level set up, and the next thing we're going to do is add a little bit of reverb. So this will be up to personal preference. Some singers will like having a little bit of reverb while they sing. Others might be fine with just the dry signal. So to do that, I'm going to go to my vocal track I'm going to go to my send to a bus. I'm going to go to the bus 1, which is currently empty. And that created a new track here called aux1. I can quickly rename this reverb. And I'm going to place a reverb on this aux track. Why don't we go with the chroma verb? And we'll just go with a preset. Why don't we try this vocal plate? And then in order to send some reverb, I'm going to just dial this up a little bit, and you'll be able to see and hear that we have reverb getting sent in there. For the sake of the video, I'm just going to mute this reverb, and we can close this now. Now we're almost getting ready to record. I just want to chat quickly about latency. So as I mentioned earlier, that's the delay you get from the time you sing into the microphone, and then that sound is going to have to go into your interface, into the computer, into Logic, and then back out. And there's going to be a little bit of a delay there. So there's a few things you can do to minimize this. The first is to go up here under Record and enable low latency mode. And what this does is it's going to disable any plugins that are creating a noticeable amount of latency. So that's going to cut down on the overall amount of latency you're getting. So this might actually disable your reverb. So if you want to make sure to keep your reverb, then this is what you would do. You would go down to your send here and click on the little arrows and then click on low latency safe. And then you might have noticed that it went from orange to blue. So now that it's blue, we know that our reverb will not get disabled when we're in low latency mode. Another thing we can do to help reduce the amount of latency is to adjust our buffer size. So let's go into our Logic preferences once again, under audio. And here, changing this IO buffer size is going to change the amount of latency that we get. So if you see here, resultant latency, 15.6 milliseconds round trip. So if I increase this buffer size, that amount of latency is going to get bigger. So that means there's going to be a longer delay between when I sing and when I hear the sound back into my headphones. And if I make this number smaller, then the latency gets smaller. Now, the one problem with making this buffer size as small as possible is that your computer has to work that much harder. And when that happens and your computer can't process the information fast enough, well, then that's when you start getting some digital artifacts like pops and clicks in your recording. So I would say a safe place to start is 256. If you have a new and modern computer, then you can try bringing this down to 128 or even 64. But also the amount of tracks and plugins you're running is going to play a big part in the amount of latency you're getting as well. And on that note, you want to limit the amount of tracks and plugins you have in your session while you're recording vocals. So one of the things you can do is actually freeze your tracks. So for example, if I had, let's say, 16 tracks and they were all filled with lots of plugins and slowing down my computer a lot, I can do what's called freezing. So to do that, I can right click on a track and I'm going to go to track header components and then freeze. And then you'll see this little snowflake and I can freeze all the tracks that I'm not recording on. And what this will do is it'll temporarily bounce each one of my tracks so that the plugins themselves don't need to be running because it's just going to play back the bounced audio. And if I press play here, you'll see that the freezing process will start. Now, another option would be to bounce out your current track and then bring that into a new session or project alternative. And then you would just have that one bounce track and your vocal track that you're recording. So you would just consolidate all your tracks down into one track. And then once you're done recording your vocals, you can import those vocals into your larger session. So now that we've covered all that, it's finally time to record our vocal. So all we have to do is click the little R button, and once again, you'll see signal. And then we can either hit record up here, or we can hit the R button on our keyboard, and that'll start recording. If we want to record a particular section of our song, we can create a cycle range using our loop over there. So for example, if I want to do bar 5 to 13, I can make that loop there. And now when I hit record, it's going to start either right on bar 5, or it'll include my count in and start from before. So on that note, if you want to adjust your count in, you can go to record here and count in. And here you'll see I have 1 bar selected right now. So that means if I hit record, it'll start playback at bar 4 and then start recording at bar 5. And now it starts recording at bar 5, as you can see. Now for me to stop, I just hit the space bar and that'll stop there. And if I zoom in, you can see my vocals recorded. Now, if I want to record multiple takes, all I have to do is re-record right over that same track. So if I hit record once more, now you'll start seeing that I'm recording right over top my other vocals. And if I hit spacebar to stop it, now you'll see I have take 2 and take 1. And it's created what's called a comp track. And I can record over as many times as I want. So I can do this a 3rd time and it'll create a 3rd take, and it'll just keep adding to this as many times as I want. So from this, I can pick and choose the best parts of each take. So for example, I can quickly select that or this, depending on which take is the best. If you want to learn more about comping vocals, I have a whole separate video covering that. And there you have it. So we've successfully set up our microphone, our interface, and all our settings in Logic Pro for a great, clean vocal performance take. If you have any more questions about recording vocals in Logic Pro, please leave those in the comments. And if you want to continue to speed up your workflow in Logic Pro, don't forget to download my free Logic Pro hotkey cheat sheet by following the link in the description below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.